Okay, recording now. Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Beitenmiller. I'm the program's chair for Pittsburgh Free Thought Community. And the Pittsburgh Free Thought Community is a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting science, reason, and humanist values in the Pittsburgh area. And now that we're online, doing virtual events all over the place. Another item for this event is that closed captioning is available. If you see the live on Otter AI up in your top left corner, then you should be able to click on that to view the closed captioning. There's the link I'm putting in the chat as well for closed captioning. And so just in case. And then if you'd like to learn more about PFC, we do these sorts of programs, speaker events. We also have social events every week. We have discussion groups. We have all sorts of things going on. Please check us out at pghfreethought.org. All right, so without further ado, our speaker tonight is one Daniel Lev Scholnick. I apologize for tripping over that.
No, that's
He's a humanist speaker and community organizer. He graduated from Yale University with a degree in sociology and promotes humanistic and naturalistic interpretations of spirituality. He's worked with Greg Epstein, the humanist chaplain at Harvard, managed a column on Patheos, and given talks to a variety of secular organizations, MIT, Harvard, Nashville, New Orleans, all over the place, on topics such as the interplay of science and morality, the celebration of life, demystifying the mystical, and tonight he'll be speaking to us about embracing spirituality as an atheist. So please, everyone, give a virtual round of applause to Daniel. And mute yourselves.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you, everybody, for having me here today. Thank you for Bob Fa for recommending me for this talking series. Yeah, as Katie said, it's been something I've been doing for a while, a bit of part of who I am as a humanist and a non-believer has been wrapped up with ideas of, well, what is spirituality? And is that something that's even possible for atheists to participate in? A friend of mine about a month ago called me up and he said, Daniel, I almost found Jesus. And this surprised me for a number of reasons, mainly because I'd known this friend since college and he was not the Jesus-loving type. He was Asian American. His family had been grew up in the Soviet Union, or not the Soviet Union, in Maoist China. Didn't have much religion in his upbringing, and he himself was a very kind of rationalistic, atheistic kind of guy. I said, okay, so you almost found Jesus. What? Tell me more. He said, I've been talking with some friends of mine who are Christians, and, I've come to really admire the psychological benefits that seem to come with Christianity. There's a sense of security, no matter, what happens, kind of a sense of that's the world is looking after you, that you can, meet any crisis and be at ease, that it will turn out all right, that you are loved. But there's only one problem. I said, oh, what's that? Well, I don't believe in God. And I don't believe, it wasn't that he just couldn't believe in God. He didn't believe in Jesus Christ as one's Lord and Savior. He didn't believe in all of the supernatural claims of Christianity. But something about the symbolism and the practices that he saw his friends partake in really attracted him. And so he asked me, is there a way for you to partake in the practices of a religion, in this case, spirituality, Christianity, without actually believing in the religion? And the short answer to him that I gave was yes. But the long answer is probably going to take the rest of this talk to fully explain. Now, before we get into how one can practice a religion or practice a certain aspect of religion, let's say prayer, for example, without believing in a religion's whole metaphysical package. First, I want to talk about what spirituality and religion are. Now, these words have a lot of baggage. And when I use them, they mean something slightly different than what most people think they mean. Spirituality and religion, they're words that have been monopolized by spiritual traditions and religious institutions for millennia. In essence, spirituality is a universal human phenomenon. In the cognitive study of religion, cognitive science of religion, there are, it's common knowledge that every single culture around the globe, throughout civilization, has had some variation of a spiritual practice, a religious ethos by which that civilization has lived, and it's looked very different ways. Sometimes it is incredibly much more secular. You, for example, look at certain kind of schools of thought in Athens at its height, or also seemingly certain other periods in which atheism was potentially much closer to the surface than it typically was. But in general, societies have had ways of talking about the deep and very powerful feelings that typically are associated with the spiritual and with the sacred. And when I'm talking about here, spiritual and sacred, I'm not talking about the supernatural. That's something that most people conflate with these words, and understandably so. What I'm talking about when I say the word spiritual and sacred is essentially the deepest parts of what it is to be a feeling and living human being. The philosopher Charles Taylor, in A Secular Age, described spirituality as striving for a sense of fullness. Sam Harris, in Waking Up, describes spirituality as a deliberate effort some people make to overcome the feelings of separateness through meditation, psychedelics, or other non-ordinary states of consciousness. But what I think spirituality is essentially, it boils down to a type of psychology. Spirituality is psychology. Now, Carl Jung was one of the early pioneers in psychology. He was a contemporary of Freud's, Sigmund Freud, and many of the ideas became seminal in our understanding of the human mind, and particularly the human unconscious. One of Jung's many influential ideas was his notions about human mythology and what that is. He looked at religion and mythology of the past, and he said that these are essentially projections of our internal unconscious selves, our unconscious universe. It's no wonder, he said, that the gods look like us, they sound like us, they have human characteristics and problems, because they are externalizations of us. We created them, not the other way around. And Carl Jung said that it's the reason why psychology is such a latecomer to the field of human study and thought is that up till about the 1800s or so, we had religion. Religion was essentially the psychology that societies relied on. Now, spirituality as as a psychological experience is primarily, I think, an emotional experience. Religion and religious experience in general is primarily emotional. Now, there are plenty of, there's a whole, world of theology that religious institutions have built up as ways of rationalizing these emotional feelings. And sometimes they can be incredibly complex, and many of the scholars in the theological world are very smart people and have come up with very complicated theories. But essentially, I think that religion is based around emotional experience. Spirituality is an emotional experience. And for this reason, I think many free thinkers, skeptics, atheists are a little bit, well, skeptical of the worth of spirituality, because it is primarily an emotional phenomenon. It's not a rational one. But just because spirituality is so based in the emotions, in human emotional systems, doesn't mean that we should discount it. Doesn't mean that it matters any less than kind of a rational person's perspective. And in fact, it's in terms of the psychological studies, rationalism is really, in many cases, just a defense, oftentimes a defense of inherent, ingrained emotional beliefs. It's very hard ever to have a purely rational perspective on an issue, on a question. And, for those that say that, oh no, I am perfectly rational as I think, as I feel, there's no influence of my emotions on my perspectives on the world. I think as soon as we start talking about something that is very close to who we are as a person, when we get close to our sense of identity in the universe, how we think it works, these days, political topics and religious perspectives or atheistic perspectives, when these subjects get brought up, very often emotions get activated, and our rational brain often tries to justify the emotions, not the other way around. In Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he basically summarized two different systems that the brain uses. System one is the fast, instinctive, and emotional one. System two is the slower, more deliberate, and more logical one. And we need both of these systems, both the instinctive and emotional ones for fast and quick decisions, and the rational one for more deliberate and logical ones. And without both of these systems, we would fail as a species, as human beings, to both quickly react to threats and assess the state of our environment, but also to think through more complicated scenarios, more complicated pieces of information. Just a friend of mine basically he gave me this perspective on emotions that has really stuck with me. They are incredibly important, he said, and really, if you think about them, they're like very complex logic. Emotions are, in a sense, a very complex form of logic, where the unconscious mind, when you enter into a room, scans around and it searches for, it gets a feel for many different variables very quickly. It takes in all this information that your conscious mind is unaware of: the temperature of the room, the lighting, how many people are there, are they smiling, do they feel threatening, do you know them, what is their mood? It takes all of this information in very quickly, and it essentially does all of this logical processing. And in a snap, it gives the conscious brain, the part of our brain that is, frontal cortex, that is good at rationalizing, and we essentially identify with ourselves, our ego. It gives our ego kind of a distillation of all this processing in the form of an emotion. If we feel somehow at ease, calm, it's because we sense that the environment around us is a calm one. We are safe here. If we somehow feel uneasy, we may not know why, but it's because the calculations that our brain is making about all of these hidden variables, all these unseen variables, is like, oh, there's something going on here. You should pay attention. So emotions in that sense are incredibly complex, and I think oftentimes get a bit of short shrift in atheist and non-believing circles. But when we're talking about the meaning of life, larger questions about who we are, what we are, and what it is to be a human. What are we looking for from our lives? I find that philosophy has a lot of insights and a lot of great ways of thinking about the world. But in my experience, the meaning of life is not a piece of information. It's not something you can read in a book so much or be told. The meaning of life is an emotional experience. You feel like you have meaning in life, or you feel like you don't. And spirituality and religious traditions essentially deal with these meaning-making processes, these deep and, in many cases, profound feelings of, authenticity, of a sense of purpose, a sense of being part of something greater than yourself, whether it is the human species or the universe at large. We find in the various spiritual and religious traditions attempts at giving one another, giving human beings a sense of place and a sense of the feeling of having meaning in life. Now, spiritual and religious traditions are much more complicated and broad than that. They do much more than merely that, and much of what they do is has been problematic over the centuries and millennia. And today, I think many people bristle at these words. Still, spiritual and religious, they taste funny in the mouth. My mother, for example, she's somebody that I love very much. She raised me as an atheist, even though we have Jewish heritage. But we were talking recently on about this subject, and she said, I have these feelings that you're talking about. I feel tranquil when I'm sitting by the lake. I see beauty in my life. I feel gratitude. All these things that you say are a part of a spiritual experience. Does that make me spiritual? And I said, well, not necessarily. Spirituality is not just a single emotion. It's not just a suite of emotions. It is a whole complex of emotions that are both positive, tranquility, beauty, awe, and can also be more difficult, grief, yearning for forgiveness, redemption. And what makes a person spiritual is not that they feel these feelings, but that they focus on them, that they essentially make time in their lives to seek them out and cultivate these feelings. As I said before, spirituality is a universal human phenomenon. We all are capable of feeling these deep things, and sometimes we don't use the terms spiritual. We don't use the terms religious. And for myself, I didn't for many years. I would often go on walks in the cemetery, and I would look up at the stars, and I would feel myself among all of these departed lives that I knew had ended right there at my feet. Their bodies lay beneath the ground, and that is where their lives ended. And I walked among the trees, and I watched the hawks fly overhead, and I watched them swoop down and eat the bunnies that scamper through the grass. And I felt this immense presence of nature, of life and death, and everything around me, and it thrilled me. The emotion that I felt in this place and at these times really was, I had no other words for it except, this is what it means to be alive. This is what it means to be human to the utmost. And in many ways, that's what brought me to creating art, and which brought me to being a writer in the first place. It wasn't until my senior year of college that my friend, who was also Jewish, he was studying Jewish theology at Yale, and he said, I was explaining to him some of these experiences that I've had, and he said, you should read William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience. Particularly, he recommended the chapter on mysticism. Mysticism. Okay, I read the chapter on his recommendation, and it floored me, because these things that William James was talking about, the accounts that he essentially was collecting from people that had had these mystical experiences, were essentially talking about the same levels of beauty and the same feelings that I had experienced growing up, and that I continue to experience from time to time. And what was even more interesting and even more shocking to me was he started his description and his chapter on mysticism not with Christian mystics or Sufi mystics. He started with non-theistic, secular experiences of mysticism. And for those of you who are curious about what those look like, I highly recommend you go and find the chapter on mysticism by William James in, again, The Varieties of Religious Experience. I'll type out the name later. You can ask me. But it's essentially people that had these immensely powerful, transformative experiences, but they didn't interpret them in a religious way because they themselves were not religious. And yet it is something that was, for them, the most important experience of their lives. So the reason I do use the words spiritual, the reason I do use the words mystical, I use them as ways of describing human experience. And I use them in a way that is very similar to the reason that Sam Harris also uses the word spiritual in many of his writings and talks. He feels like there's no better word to describe it. And what's more is that, if we pretend like this is not something that spirituality and religious experience are just something that happened in the past, that just something that the crazy supernatural believing traditions of the past, only they experienced these states and had access to them. I think we're cutting ourselves off from thousands of years of traditions where people are trying to make sense of how to live with meaning in the world. And I think many people right now in the humanistic, atheistic spheres are trying to figure out, well, how do we live, joyous, ecstatic, deep lives? And I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel on this. I think that there are treasure troves of spiritual practice, psychological practice in the old wisdom traditions that we, if we're able to, we can adapt to our own beliefs. And I think that they can work just as well, even if you don't believe in the traditions and the metaphysics. So I'm not saying that we turn a blind eye to things like faith healers, to religious problems, and the whole host of very negative things that also come with religion. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that I think as non-believers, we can do a better job of acknowledging and cultivating the value of sacred human experience. Now, I'd like to pause here just for a second and give people a chance to respond. We'll take 3 to 5 minutes here. I know I've said some things that maybe people are itching to respond to, and I don't want people to forget their thoughts. But any clarifying questions, anything, or just outright rage, please let me know right now. Thank you, Bob. I guess we'll use, either you type into the chat, or you can unmute yourself, and one at a time, and ask a question to me directly.
I'll ask a question then, Daniel. So what? And I know already some of the answers because I've talked with you about some of these things, but I would love to hear more of your thoughts on what's, like, if you could recommend to someone that if they want to deepen their life and cultivate more of these secular spiritual experiences, what is one thing that you would suggest that people do to flesh out that dimension of living and meaning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's jumping ahead to later in my talk where I do just that, but so I studied existentialism early on in college. It was something that I found, it was one of the first kind of like really rigorous ways of trying to come to grips with death. And I heard about Martin Heidegger as one of the premier existentialists, one of the big names. And in a lecture, a student asked him, like, how can I become a more authentic person? How can I live more in line with this philosophy and more fully as a human being? And Heidegger said, you should spend more time in cemeteries. And he meant that seriously, and I also mean that seriously. Not necessarily cemeteries. If cemeteries feel strange or out of place to you, don't worry. But in my own history, in my own story, as I mentioned, cemeteries are a great place for a couple of things. One, being out in nature, and two, being surrounded by memento mori, reminders of death. And that's something that the Stoics, the Stoic philosophers, also really highly recommended. Stoics do, and also in the Buddhist tradition as well, meditations on a corpse, meditations on your own death, is something that people highly recommend, because it brings you to think about your life. It confronts you with your own mortality, and confronts you with the largest questions, and that you, as a human being, you have to answer. And being out in nature, being outside, being among trees, being among plants, is something that is another catalyst for spiritual and also mystical experience. Ralph Hood is a professor at the University of Tennessee, and he studies mystical experience, both religious based and non. And in his scale, in his M scale, the mystical scale, it's basically this survey about trying to figure out the intensity of people's mystical experiences, whether, and this is something that can be used and has been used with psychedelics, but also, outside of psychedelics as well. He found that the going out into nature and spending time in nature is one of the things that really brings people into a mental state and into an emotional state that is in which they are able to confront these larger questions. So, very simply, spend more time in cemeteries, spend more time outdoors, spend more time really thinking and also feeling these through these deeper emotions. and I'll talk later in the talk, about other practical ways of doing it, but very simply, that I think is one of the single most powerful and effective things that I've ever done, and it's something that many people, both religious and non, recommend.
Thank you.
All right, let's see. We've got some questions in the chat. Okay, so Stefano asked, this concept was spiritualism is not tracing back to the Stoicism, Neoplatonism, and part of the theology of Augustine. Not quite understanding that question, Stefano. You're asking if it traces back to these old traditions.
If you take the may I speak? Yes.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So if you trace back to the Stoicism, it is the fundamental of the Christian religion, of the Christian philosophy, because it was this one. You have to say, first of all, that you have to be free for passion to understand the meaning, the soul of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Augustine that introduced the concept that we are living in God, but not in the sense that we are believing in God.
Mm-hmm.
That you are part of a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes what you are calling a mythical experience and so on is you have an idea, a blip of what is the whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In this sense.
Yeah. I would say that that is definitely that's definitely what I'm talking about. That falls under the umbrella of spiritual experience, of religious experience, and I think that they were not the first ones to conceptualize or put these kinds of feelings into words. You find these actually in Chinese philosophy and Chinese tradition as well, and across the world, and Indian as well. But yes, I think that as you point out, Stoicism was many of its values became foundational for Christianity, and the kind of Neoplatonic and Augustinian traditions. They very much had an influence on Christian conceptions of religion.
Taking apart the church, the today church, the real church that we are living on, I was always saying that for the summit of the Catholic, of the Christian religion is to be spirit of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end, this is the top. You have the full knowledge of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's right. I think that in descriptions of mystical experience in particular, you find that experience quite commonly, a sense of merging with the all, merging with a universal home.
Yes.
And whether or not people oftentimes feel as if they have ultimate knowledge, and in fact that's a characteristic of mystical experience. It's like you're pulling back the veil on reality, and you see reality as it actually is. Whether or not that is actual reality is something I am skeptical of. I think that more than anything, that is, you get a sensation that you're experiencing ultimate reality, but whether or not the ideas that you gain from that, or the insights you gain from that, map onto physical reality, I wouldn't say so. I'd say they map onto, again, psychological reality. They essentially are speaking about something incredibly human and incredibly personal.
I agree with you. Thanks.
Yeah. I'll quickly answer the other few questions on the chat, just because I think I can give them concise, quick answers, and then we'll go back to continue with my talk. So Katie's asking, okay, do you think that being raised atheist made you more receptive to spirituality? I feel that those who reject religion reject spirituality along with it. Yeah, I think I don't have the kind of scars and damage that I think many people that have been raised in religious households, in religious traditions, and then have, leave for atheism. I find a lot of damage there that I fortunately didn't experience. And so, for me, my relationship with religion and these spiritual traditions of the world is much more one of curiosity. At first I thought it was, they were ridiculous in many ways, but I think being raised as an atheist, I didn't have that kind of fall. I didn't have that much of the emotional harm that comes with being raised religious and then coming out of it in sometimes a brutal and abusive way. And so Andy is asking, do you take spirituality talk to refer to something in external reality or just a very special kind of internal experience? The latter, Andy. Yes, I think of it as referring to an internal experience. That when people talk about spirituality, when people talk about their visions and their talks with God or with Krishna, this is not something I interpret as an external reality, but an internal psychological one. And oftentimes when I'm speaking with somebody who is talking about their profoundly religious supernatural experiences, in my head I'm translating as they speak, like, okay, this is what they felt, this is how their mind interpreted this, and this is their internal experience of this. It doesn't make it any less real for these people, but it doesn't mean that this is a representation necessarily of an external reality, much more an internal state of affairs. All right. And did you have something to add? All right. Well, in that case, I'll continue. All right. Great. So no dynamite. Nothing blew up. Things are going well, I'd say. I want to return to my friend who I started with at the beginning of the talk. He had the question, can I practice a religious practice, in this case Christianity, without believing in Christianity? And this is not an obvious question. Doesn't have an obvious answer. For a long time, I wasn't sure of the answer. I wasn't sure that, as a non-believer, you could come to a religious tradition, let's say, take up prayer, and expect it to have all of the effects, even psychologically beneficial effects that a believer would have when they pray. I felt like, there is a lack of authenticity, a lack of honesty, a lack of, it not only does it feel strange and wrong in some ways sometimes, but it could also, if you're praying to something and you don't actually believe that something is going to help you in any supernatural way, is that prayer actually effective? Do you know that, well, I'm just asking for protection, I'm asking for strength, but there's really nothing out there in the universe that's going to give it to me. Do you still feel protected? Do you still feel strong? And for a long time, I wasn't sure how to answer that question, whether or not various spiritual techniques would work without the accompanying belief. I did, over the years, I've spent a lot of time with different people who are both atheistic or agnostic, and also very spiritual, people who write and think about these kinds of questions. And I myself have done a lot of experimentation with different forms of spiritual technique. That's one of the ways why I moved down to New Orleans, because there is a thriving world of spirituality, particularly both in the Catholic heritage of the city, but also in the heritage of voodoo or vodou, and much more modernly, the kind of New Age incarnations of spirituality. And these belief systems, particularly New Age, have for a long time were like nails on chalkboard for me, and sometimes they still are. I listen to some of my very good friends talk about energy in completely ridiculous ways, and well, I have to very patiently explain to them the difference between what physicists mean by energy and what the aura readers are talking about when they say energy, what tarot card readers talk about when they say energy. There's a difference between the psychological energy, the feelings, again, that the unconscious mind brings to the conscious mind, and the physical descriptions of the world. Notwithstanding that, as a tangent, essentially, I've come to think that in reality, we can practice and partake in spiritual practices that we don't believe in, but that could still have an effect, even though we know the practice is not real. And essentially, what this is a type of fictionalism. Fictionalism is a branch of philosophy in which you essentially work with useful fictions. You act as if certain things are true, even though you know that they're not. And this, a very easy example of this is the concept of up and down. There's no such thing. Relatively, we all use up and down when we walk around the world, and nobody bats an eye. Nobody thinks to call people out, liar. There's no such thing. This is understood as a relative experience. Up in space, up, down, left, right, forward, backwards, they all evaporate. But it's something that we use as a useful fiction to live our lives. In regard to religious tradition or ritual, a friend of mine who is very much a skeptic about metaphysical subjects is at the same time fascinated in occultism. And he's a friend of mine down in New Orleans, and he explained to me that how he thinks about occultism, these magical rituals, these magical symbols, is in terms of kayfabe. Now, kayfabe, for those who are unfamiliar, is a word from professional wrestling, of all places. And it is an incredibly useful philosophical concept. I'll explain why. So kayfabe, K-A-Y-F-A-B-E, is the notion of this kind of false theater that is going on. For those unfamiliar, when you go to watch a professional piece of professional wrestling, you're essentially going to watch theater. The wrestlers are essentially actors. They're acrobats. They're putting on a show for people. There's all these rivalries and these strange storylines that are happening, and it's completely ridiculous and completely unrealistic. And everybody in the audience knows that. And that show, that level of reality, is what gets people excited, and that is the kayfabe. That is the kind of fable that they're watching. If you break kayfabe, essentially you are breaking. If let's say for a wrestler, accidentally breaks his character, he's breaking kayfabe. He's breaking that illusion and revealing that he's an actor doing performing these things in this ritualistic way, but everybody in the audience knows that this isn't real, and yet they spend, it's a multi-million dollar industry, and it's something that people come to again and again because it provides an emotional thrill, an emotional reaction, emotional reality that they really value. They love it. I personally don't understand it, but people really love their professional wrestling. I can't explain why. But in essence, my friend was saying that, this concept of kayfabe is how I think about occultism. If I am partaking in, the kind of occult ritual in the woods, like we're burning, a fire, and there, there's chanting going on or something like that, and we're using various symbols. This is, I know that there's no magic going on, and yet the kind of the fantasy of it, the kayfabe, is something that is incredibly meaningful and powerful for me. And I'm able to, in this half fantasy realm, I'm able to feel things and work through things that I wouldn't be able to do, otherwise in the daily world. And so spiritual techniques, religious practices, ritual, all of these things can be used without actually believing in the religious tradition itself. And I think the reason why my friend is able to do this, I think the reason why, occult practice for him is still so powerful, even though he knows that there's nothing supernatural going on, is that the unconscious mind is notoriously bad at differentiating between what is real and what is not. The unconscious mind has a hard time telling dream from reality, for example. And in the realm of the placebo effect, for example, the unconscious mind is famously has some very strange ways of interacting with treatments and medicine. Dr. Ted Kaptchuk at the Harvard Medical School has been researching the placebo effect for many years, and he's found some remarkable things about it. But one of the things that has stuck with me is that even if you are taking a sugar pill as your treatment, and that it is a sugar pill, your rational brain understands that you are not getting any actual medicine. You will still get a placebo effect. You will still feel a reduction in pain, or if that's what you're suffering, you will still feel in some cases side effects that people that the doctor implies you may feel. Even if the rational brain knows the reality, it's a sugar pill, the unconscious brain isn't so sure, and it can still exhibit. And it was, it's believed that it is the unconscious mind that is responsible for that effect. So it's not entirely clear all of the workings of the unconscious mind. We are, I think, a long way from really understanding what is going on in things like the placebo effect, and in general how the majority of our minds work. But we're coming to understand it more and more. And this quality of the unconscious mind, being able to essentially, understand one thing to be real or not with our frontal cortex, with our logical thinking mind, and at the same time being invested in believing something to be real when it's not with the unconscious mind, it can be used, it can be manipulated or hacked in very interesting ways. And what I mean by that is, as non-believers, if we don't have to capitulate our beliefs in or essentially our non-belief for the sake of making use of some of the emotionally beneficial practices that religions have developed. So, for example, I was giving a talk at NanoCon, also with Bob Faw, actually, the Nashville Nones Convention. And it was a talk much like this about spirituality and secular life. And after the talk, a man came up to me and he said, you know, I've been an atheist most of my life. And there was one time, though, that, you know, I was in Japan and I climbed up Mount Fuji. And it was just before dawn. I was climbing up the mountain and it was bitter cold. The birds weren't even up yet. And I struggled and struggled, and I reached the top, and I saw one of those torii, one of those red gates that the Shinto religion puts up in natural places to mark where spirits are thought to reside. And he saw this thing, and he saw the sun rising through it and dawn breaking. And he fell to his knees and he began to weep. He said it was one of the most profound things that I've ever experienced. It didn't stop him being an atheist. He wasn't somehow religious in that moment or afterwards. He didn't start magically believing in tree spirits or mountain spirits, as is common in Shintoism in Japan. But he had this experience through a combination of being out in nature, as I mentioned before, but also, you know, seeing and interacting with this temple, this piece of sacred architecture that marked essentially it was a cultural symbol of sacredness. And in that place and in that moment, he essentially had what many people would term a religious experience. And some people might call it even a mystical experience. But he didn't interpret it in any supernatural way. And really, I don't think anything supernatural was going on. He was simply being more human, more deeply alive to his reality, to, you know, the beauty of nature and the emotional anguish that he was feeling at the time, or the emotional bliss that he was feeling. He was more in tune and alive with it than at other times. And that, again, is, I think, what constitutes the core of spiritual and religious experience, not to the supernatural aspect. So, returning to this question of prayer, for example, and prayer is something that is maybe a more complicated and more sticky form of spiritual practice. I think for a lot of people have kind of an instinctive reaction against it, and really, I think also there's a lot of, you know, it brings up this question of, okay, as an atheist, can you pray? Does it do any good? I mean, to you, does it do any good whatsoever? If you know that the sky is empty of ears, so to say, if there's nobody listening, does prayer do anything? I was reading an article on the Secular Spiritualist Society's website. It's a fantastic resource for anybody that's interested in secular spirituality. We've got a lot of articles on there, a lot of different people that have thought about the kind of intersection between secularism and spirituality. And one author was talking about atheist prayer. And he explained that for many years, as an atheist, he has been praying. And he gets on his knees, he folds his arms, he puts his head down, and he prays for strength, he prays for forgiveness, he prays for the ability to forgive others, he prays for love, he prays for all these things that, you know, a typical Christian might ask for. But he doesn't pray to Jesus, he doesn't pray to Allah, he doesn't pray to Krishna. He prays outwards towards the world. And he says, you know, the thing that is essential about prayer is not that you're interacting with or praying to a supernatural being. The essential part about prayer is that you are interacting with something that is larger than yourself, that you are humbled by it, that you feel in awe, that you feel that you are just a human, that your powers are limited, and that there's something larger in the world that you can commune with. And for him, that is the universe, that's the natural world, that is the nebulas and galaxies that spin and spiral out in space, that is the fields and the mountains and the crashing waves on the rocks, that is everything that lies outside of our skin. And he says also that when you are praying, you think that you're directing your attention outwards, and that's what you do. You direct your attention outwards, at asking for these things, these emotional strengths. But really, what you're doing is you're directing your attention inwards at the same time. You're essentially able to interact with that unconscious part of yourself, that unconscious mind. And this is coming back to Carl Jung and what Jung thought about how the mind works, that really the external world that we see is not purely physical. We project onto it our internal world. How we feel in a given moment colors the way that we see reality. Whether we're in a depressed state or in an ecstatic state colors the way in which we perceive certain how we count certain things in different experiments, in experimental settings, how we interpret other people. And when we are looking out at the world, whether it's a starry night, whether it is the ceiling of a cathedral, we're not just looking at the physical world outside of us. We are also looking at essentially a projection of our internal world. And this is not something we see visually, but it's something that we feel. If we feel ourselves humbled and awed in a space, it's because we ourselves, our internal world, is experiencing that. It's not coming from outside into us. It is something that we experience entirely within our own chests, within our own brains. I decided to give prayer a shot. This was about 5 or 6 months ago. It was the first time I ever prayed. This is after reading this atheist's description of what he himself does. I got down in front of my bed. I got down on my knees, clasped my hands, put my head down, and I tried to imagine the world outside my window. Tried to imagine, the crashing waves, the nebula out in space. I tried to imagine everything that is larger and more mysterious than I am. And I asked for something very specific. I, at that time, was having trouble forgiving a few people in my life. They were people that had done me wrong. They were people that I was no longer friends with for the things that they did and said. And I carried around this hurt. I carried around this pain with me, and I couldn't let it go. I had tried meditation. I had tried thinking through it. I tried talking through it with other friends of mine. I couldn't let it go. And so when I was praying, I asked for the strength and the ability to forgive these people. And I put all my concentration in it, and I put as much effort into it as I possibly could. And I did this over the course of several days, several nights. And it was like some knot inside of my gut, some fist that I was holding unclenched. These things, these emotions that were so deeply buried in my mind, in I couldn't rationally just let them go, even though I wanted to. They were they were in my unconscious. They were in that part of my brain that I cannot simply will with my thoughts. But prayer, I think, and spiritual tradition in general, it gives us an opportunity to access. It is a tool that we can use to access those parts of our mind and ourselves that we on our own cannot simply will to change. That's how Carl Jung conceived of it, and he conceived of various tools and mechanisms very similar to vision quests and prayer, to help his clients, to help his patients to similarly let go of certain things, to find themselves, make themselves more whole as human beings. And I likened this to something that I'd heard of called mirror therapy. It's basically a kind of therapy that was developed by Vilayanur Ramachandran, this Indian doctor. And it's very simple. It essentially involves just a mirror. And people with that have lost a limb, for example, let's say I've lost my right hand, oftentimes the right hand, the phantom hand, will continue to clench, and the person will be unable to unclench it. And this clenching of their fist becomes painful over days and weeks and months. And it's a bizarre and strange thing because there's no physical hand there, but part of the brain recognizes, thinks that there is, and the pain is real for these people. Even though the physical hand is not there, the pain is incredibly real. And the way that the solution that he discovered was using the mirror neurons in the brain along with an actual mirror. He had patients sit with a mirror in the center of their bodies, and they had them look at the side of their left hand that was still there, reflected in the mirror. So it looked as if both hands were there, the left hand and the right hand, the ghost hand reflected in the mirror. And he had the patient unclench the left hand. And when the patient saw the right hand unclenching, the pain went away. And this is something that is now commonly used to treat phantom limb pain, as well as different other psychological disorders. But it basically uses the brain's mirror neurons and this visual technique to access this part of the unconscious mind that the conscious mind cannot simply release, cannot simply choose to let go of or to change. And this is, I think, the best description, the best analogy that I can come up with what it was like for me when I prayed. I was able to unclench this fist that I was holding, and since then, every time I think about these people, the things that they did, and the things that they said, the ways they did me wrong, I can still see and recognize the wrong in them, but I no longer have this immense anger and resentment that I had at the beginning. And so, there are many other techniques in various different religious traditions and also philosophical traditions that have been developed over the centuries and millennia to give us access to these unconscious parts of our mind. And more than that, give us an ability to feel as if we have meaning, to experience the meaning of life. It's not a piece of information, as I said before. It's not something that anybody can tell you, but it is a feeling that one can have. I find in my own spiritual practice, so to speak, I have various tools, a whole toolkit that I use for different occasions. Prayer is now something that I use regularly when I'm facing really intense emotions that I cannot simply will away. Prayer, I find, is very good for that. When I need strength that I feel like I may not have, confidence I feel like I'm lacking, or empathy that is hard to come by, I will turn to prayer. But it's not good for everything. Meditation is something that I do often, and I think many people, especially in contemporary times, meditation has been adopted as a kind of secular practice. Many atheists I know practice it regularly, and it's great for calming the mind and calming the body. Meditation is very similar and related to another practice called contemplation, and basically contemplation, is thinking in a specific way. Though the practice of contemplation is first involves beginning in meditation, calming the mind, and bringing your emotions onto calming your emotions, and then bringing up something that you're struggling with in terms of a problem in your life, a complicated rational question, and thinking about it. What meditation, what that initial meditation and what the whole practice of contemplation allows you to do is to think about these questions with as much equanimity as possible. Remember, at the beginning I said, oftentimes we don't think purely rationally because emotions are so entwined and entangled with our rational minds. And what contemplation does is it allows us, it doesn't get rid of our emotions, but it allows us to notice when those emotions come up. When we think about a certain political issue, for example, we can watch our emotions rise up and we can start to think, okay, how does this influence my thought? Is that fair? How can I think differently about this? Or how can I talk with somebody else about this, knowing that these are emotions that flare up in them as well? That's a practice of contemplation. Introspection is something else that I use as well. And this is a process of looking inward. Again, very similar to meditation. You start with calming of the mind, and of the body, but instead of focusing on the breath or focusing on keeping a blank mind as much as possible, as meditation often asks us to do, introspection is part of the practice is allowing your mind to drift, intentionally to let it go and see where it scampers. Carl Jung, again, one of his techniques that he developed was something called active imagination, and essentially it's basically the same thing as introspection, but active imagination was bringing yourself to, or somebody else, to a place of a hypnagogic state. And a hypnagogic state is a state that is just above sleep, just above dreams. And it is something that allows you to, when you're in this state, you're much closer to your unconscious mind, the dream, to our dream mind, and the symbols and images that come up in that state when you're awake and aware, but you're very much in tune with these strange symbols and goings on. Carl Jung used this as basically a technique to check in with what is going on beneath the hood. Oftentimes it's very hard to communicate with the unconscious mind because it doesn't speak in language. It speaks in images. It speaks in symbols. It speaks in dreams. And the practice of active imagination, of introspection, allows you to check in and get in touch with what the unconscious mind is doing, and sometimes even talk with the unconscious mind. If there is a figure that appears in your in this state, either a lost loved one or kind of a character. You can talk with them. You can ask them why they're there, what message they have for you. And in many spiritual and religious traditions, this has often been interpreted as a kind of out-of-body experience or an interaction with angels or jinns or demons. This has been kind of interpreted as vision quests, excuse me, or various other kinds of supernatural phenomena. But Jung said that, really this is us interacting with, again, that unconscious aspect of ourselves that works with images, that works with feelings, that works with symbols. And by doing this, we would be able to, in some ways, come to grips with those deeper parts of ourselves. Now, let's see. How are we doing on time? Is
Doing fine.
does it go to 8:30? Is that right?
Scheduled to 8:30, but if you're willing to talk to us longer, we won't refuse.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll for respecting people's time, I'll start wrapping up, and then I also want to get into some Q&A and open discussion as well. So let's see, where were we? So suffice to say, I think looking at wisdom traditions of the past, both religious traditions and also philosophical traditions like Stoicism, with its recommendation for memento mori, for amor fati, to love one's fate, regardless of what happens to you. In traditions such as skepticism, and what I mean by that is the ancient Greek form of skepticism, in which skeptics were urged to basically take apart all claims of knowledge, all logical, all claims to truth that they encountered. And, for some people that may sound depressing, that there's nothing you can believe in if you're constantly skeptical, if you're constantly destroying, both other people's truths and any truth that you yourself try to claim, you also tear down. How can that be a happy life that you lead? But the skeptics actually said that no. What happens when you come to understand that any epistemological system, any system of gaining truth and knowledge, is limited, is essentially cannot be fully believed in or proven. When you find yourself in that place of total skepticism, you end up in tranquility. You end up realizing that you don't have to argue with people. You don't have to worry about your own thought system being correct. You don't have to worry about what is true or not true. You're able to experience life and just know that you don't know. As Socrates said, I'm the wisest man because I know that I know nothing. It is essentially a skeptical expression, perspective on the world, and I think it's something that exists in the Buddhist Mahayana tradition as well. A tranquility is possible when you realize that you don't know, and you may never know, and yet that is not something that impedes a happy life. In fact, you're able to enjoy things without that anxiety and that judgment. But in terms of adopting various spiritual traditions that already exist, let's say prayer from Christianity, or Shabbat from Judaism, or even meditation from Buddhism, or various pagan or occult practices, there's a word of warning that I want to give. For anybody that is interested in doing this kind of work, I'd say do it carefully. And what I mean by that is, in the 60s and 70s, with when New Age traditions, the New Age movement was coming into existence, there was this kind of it was a very heady time in which people were disavowing Christianity and searching for spiritual enlightenment in various Eastern traditions. Buddhism and Hinduism were powerful among them, but also various pagan traditions from both from Europe, from Native American traditions, from all over the world. And one of the major critiques of New Age spirituality, both then and now, is that it is a kind of cherry picking from these different traditions. It is taking the things that you love best about something and ignoring the rest. And the risk there is that you may end up with a shallow spirituality. An example of this is yoga, and the way that yoga has become incorporated into modern American and Western popular spirituality. Yoga is a long history, Hindu tradition. And the physical aspect of yoga is only one of the 8 branches of yoga. Asana, the physical aspect, was really just one in the whole kind of system of life, the life approach that yoga involved. And it involved, a moral system, how you act, how you speak, how you think, involved contemplation and meditation, involved all these other things besides the actual physical postures, and which in olden times were very few, and there were very few yogic postures. But today in America, with the popularization of yoga through the New Age movement and its adoption as this multi-billion-dollar industry, yoga has become essentially Americanized. It's taken up many of the business practices of American business for better and for worse. The emphasis is now on strength and physique. It's based. Oftentimes, there's a sexualization of the body that doesn't exist in traditional forms. Typically, yoga is done with baggy and concealing clothing. You walk into a yoga studio today, and you see a lot of tight-fitting clothing that is essentially, it embodies much of what yoga is trying to deliver: a beautiful body, a healthy body. Nothing wrong with that, but there's a risk in focusing too much on these physical aspects, forgetting and removing yoga from its original context and all of the other lessons and philosophy that went into the yogic school of thought. And the real risk, I think, is that some people think that simply by doing yoga, they are holier by it. They are more spiritually pure. They are, better people for it. And, I love yoga as well. I do it all the time. I think it has a lot of benefits, but I also know that doing yoga alone, that will not make me a better person. That has nothing to do with any kind of supernatural, my soul's supernatural standing in the world. It has nothing to do with my karma. That is something that, we have to take into our own hands. The way that we live our life, the way that we think, the way that we speak, all of this is something that the physical incarnation of yoga, as it's been popularized, does not provide us. And I think many people sometimes are misguided or delude themselves to think that by getting the luxury clothes from Lululemon, that get the latest mat and doing yoga postures at dawn on a beach will inherently make them a better person. And it's not necessarily so. There's also something in the New Age tradition that I think was criticized a lot, and I think rightly so. Spiritual traditions and spiritual practice oftentimes involves a change of mental state, a change of consciousness. When you do various exercises like yoga, or even walking outside, when you are reciting mantras, when you are doing prayer, you're essentially changing the state of your brain. And if in some traditions, particularly in the traditions that use drugs or medicines like mushrooms, magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, different forms of hallucinogenic frogs and the like, these and also practices that have nothing to do with drugs, but that nonetheless bring you to a state of ecstasy. These traditions became very popular in New Age circles, and they also, in some ways, were distractions. Ram Dass, one of the early kind of thinkers and pioneers of the New Age movement and of psychedelics in general. He was friends with Timothy Leary. He later went to India, studied Hinduism. He became disenchanted with LSD and psychedelics. He was at first at Harvard, one of the psychologists that was very much interested in experimenting with them, but eventually he became disenchanted with psychedelics, and with much of that kind of the striving of certain people for those blissful ecstatic states. Ram Dass said that it's not about a change of state. That's not the point. It's about a change of traits. What spirituality is really striving for, Ram Dass is saying, is not about flying up into the stars and seeing the world from above. Actually, something that various Greek philosophers, a technique that is found in several Greek traditions as well. It's not about feeling that you have touched the feet of God or have become one with Krishna. It's about what happens afterwards. It's about when those feelings fade, and they always fade. But when you come back down to earth and you come back down to yourself, how are you changed? How have your traits, your character, how has that been affected? Are you better for it? Have you come to understand something about yourself or something about how you treat other people that is now different? I think these states, as powerful as they are, they're powerful not because of having access to a supernatural reality, but because they give us access to a human reality, a real lived emotional and psychological reality that all of us have. And the real power of them, I think, is helping us to see ourselves, to come face to face with who we are and what our place is in humanity and in the universe in general. And it's something that can make us better people if we use it right. If we take these experiences and we integrate them, if we see what we can learn from them, as opposed to assuming that they inherently make us holier or better people. And I'll close on this note. Spirituality is fundamentally, I think, a confrontation with ourselves. Spiritual practice brings us face to face with reality, not necessarily the physical reality of the universe, but the reality of our internal universe. It won't make you into an angel. It won't make you into a god, but it could potentially do something better. It could make you more human than you were before. And for me, that's something that I'm willing to invest my time and my life in doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Do you have any additional time for Q&A?
Yes, absolutely. All the time in the world.
So you can just call it when you say this will be the last question or something. For those who would like to ask questions, you can either type the question in the chat and it'll be answered from the chat, or you can type your name in the chat and it will call on you to unmute and you can ask it directly. I'm going to abuse my power to go first. So my question is, you mentioned at the very beginning of emotions as complex logic, taking in inputs and giving you what can be valuable information. That seemed like an argument in favor of paying more attention to them, valuing them more, taking your intuition. But then a lot of your later examples were using some of these techniques to kind of get rid of emotions and give more power to your rational mind, and how the unconscious mind can be fooled. So how do you, I guess, balance those two things?
Yeah. So the attention practices like meditation, contemplation, introspection that I was mentioning, um, I wouldn't characterize them as getting rid of emotion. That's something I think is a mischaracterization of Buddhism and the goal of meditation. You know, in a meditative state, you're still feeling emotions. The emotions are still there. What's different is that they're not hijacking your decision making. They're not hijacking your brain. You're able to see them and watch them without immediately acting upon them. And I think that's one of the powers of attention practices. It helps us to be more aware of how these emotions influence us in our daily lives, in our daily thinking. But emotions are not a perfect system. Our logical brains are not a perfect either. I think the emotions are incredibly, as I said, incredibly good at making decisions quickly for us, and they're very good at working through complicated social questions. The very fact that we wouldn't be as successful as we are as a species if it weren't for our emotions, if we weren't for our ability to empathize with other people, to cooperate and work together, and to do it very quickly. But the emotional system on its own is not foolproof, and I think that's where where the attention practices really shine, is they help us to manage and kind of deal with emotions that may be out of control, maybe are have a lot to do with hurt or anger or fear that is clouding our judgment.
Thank you. Stefano, can you unmute yourself, or I can unmute you?
So my comment, thank you for this beautiful speech, is that for me, from my point of view, you are speaking about inner peace at the end. That is not, and I think that the most difficult point is to forgive the other and forgive yourself. This is the point. It is the final point of all the meditation, of all the idea of fasting and so on. It's but the highest point is the capability of forgiving the other. Truly, not to say I forgive you and then I kill you, I stagger you from behind. This is only common.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think forgiveness is an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's in some religious traditions, forgiveness is taken to some people strive to forgive everyone, the whole world, and it's something that sounds idealistic, and you often hear this in kind of Christian theology, trying to forgive all and forgive everyone. It's very difficult to do, because how do you forgive murderers? How do you forgive your enemies? Especially those enemies that personally. It's not easy. But actually, I believe it was Cicero, again, going back to the Stoics. He was saying, to be able to forgive others, to be less angry with them, you first have to be able to forgive all of humanity. And what he meant by that, I think, is, we're all human. We're all limited, and we all have, our petty emotions and our petty egos. And, if you recognize that, the person that cut you off, or the person that did you wrong, like, that they themselves are just human beings that are struggling to, that are fearful, that are envious, that have all of this stuff going on within them, that are hateful, because they themselves have been led into a place of hatred. It doesn't mean that we should allow them to continue doing this. Doesn't mean that we should say, okay, that's fine. You know what? No, that's all right. You can be hateful. No, that's why we have laws. That's why we have society. That's why we argue and sometimes have to go to war, to settle some of our differences, or to protect others, to protect certain people from other people's hatred. But I think recognizing that there's no such thing as evil, and at the same time there's no such thing as good. They're just people. They're just people that are trying to figure out how to live on this earth. And if for those that are trying to, I think, come to a sense of tranquility, not to a place of inaction, but a sense of tranquility about the world, it's useful to remember that we're all mired in the same human body and with the same human minds. And it's not a pretty thing, but it helps us empathize and forgive.
Andy, you're up next.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you, Daniel. That was really interesting stuff. I thought your example of kayfabe in professional wrestling was especially interesting. I'm going to use just very simplistic language to describe sort of the world of pro wrestling. In ways, from my perspective as an outsider, it's kind of a big cathartic game of let's pretend.
Mm-hmm.
That the wrestlers and the audience all kind of, mutually suspend disbelief and get to enjoy the emotions of it. That's not too dissimilar from what I do when I cheer for our hometown football team. I kind of allow myself to believe or pretend that it really matters whether the guys in the jerseys that I like win or not. And, it can release emotions that I enjoy. I think you described prayer as kind of just, sending appeals out to somebody you may not even believe exists. There's an element of pretense there, even if it works. It's emotional level. It seems to me that this is not altogether different from our humanistic belief in human rights. I mean, there's no empirical evidence that human rights exist, but we all kind of buy into the idea. We deliberately pretend that rights exist because, hey, it all works out better for us when we do. So there's clearly very constructive ways to engage in this kind of pretense, but it can also become, if you indulge in this kind of unreality enough, you can become a science denier. You can become a cult member. You can become a Trump supporter, right? There are all kinds of ways in which frequent indulgence in sort of non-reality based pretense can lead to sort of unhinged thinking. Do you have any thoughts on how we can meet our spiritual needs without becoming destructive in the process?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a good point. There's several good points that you made. There's notion of human rights is taken by some as so commonsensical as to be almost a law of human nature or of the universe. But it's really only something that's came into conception at the beginning of the 20th century, and really came into written conception and into practice. But yeah, it's I think the point about how not to let oneself slip down the rabbit hole, or to get lost in fantasy. I think that's a good one. I think it's in terms of one's metaphysical beliefs, in terms of one's deep convictions. I think those things they're hard to change, and they change slowly. I think those that have, I think, a really strong sense of self, and those that have worked to develop it, and they know what they value. It's you're able to kind of suspend disbelief, and you know what you're suspending. You know where you're coming back to. The wrestlers are really actors, and you don't become delusional in thinking that these are actual kind of like superhero style kind of fighters duking it out. But not everybody sees it that way, and I think especially these beliefs and perspectives on the supernatural can change, and they can people can go from not believing to believing, or believe or not believing explicitly, but believing in various superstitions that I think modern New Age practice is a very good one, in which people tell me, I don't believe in tarot cards, and I don't believe in the zodiac, and yet they check their horoscope and they go and pay for tarot card readings, and I ask them, yeah, but it seems like you act as if you do, and you make decisions in your life based on the answers that you get from these things. Anyway, that's a whole different conversation. But I would say that what's one of the really valuable tools that I think non-believers have is our skepticism, is the ability to think in terms of this ambiguous space of how do I know what I know? To constantly be questioning in our own epistemologies. Ask what am I really sure? Am I really sure that the world is how I think it is? I think you start to really slip when you start to be too sure, when you start to think that that and then that starts to close off our minds, to close off our both intellectually and emotionally to other perspectives. And that's where it really starts getting dangerous. It's not any particular perspective that's dangerous. It is the entrenchment in one that is the most dangerous.
Thank you.
Let's see. I also want to mention, I forgot to mention this. I am actually about to launch a podcast about precisely these topics. It's going to be called Reenchantment, Finding Wonder in a Secular Age. So if anybody is keen on hearing more of my voice and more of my ideas, please, I think, I don't know, would leaving your email or in the chat, that might be the easiest way. I'd love to be able to let people know about the podcast when it launches in the next couple of weeks. There's going to be plenty of fascinating stuff on, Einstein's conceptions of God and religion. Ideas about whether ideologies are actually modern day religions, such as communism or humanism, for example. So yeah, if you want to be informed, I think leave your email in the chat, and I'll add it. I'll let you know when that podcast launches.
I can try to copy paste those all together and send you a list, Daniel, since
thank you
I'll
so
have
much,
the
Katie.
control of the Zoom chat.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Katie. Yeah.
Well, I didn't see any other questions, but I do want to give people a minute here to put their emails in if they would like to.
And I think here I'll type in what is it? I mentioned I was going to give the title to William James's book. William James. William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience, chapter on mysticism. William James, for those who don't know, he was one of the founders of American psychology, sometimes called the father of American psychology, and he was a seminal figure, a pragmatist, and also very much interested in religious ideas and religious psychology. So he's a fascinating figure. And for those that also want to get some more resources, I think on spiritual practice that one can do as an atheist or as a non-believer, I'm going to link to the Spiritual Naturalist Society, their practices and ritual page. It's a really great resource for they basically are articles by various spiritual naturalists. They consider themselves both spiritual and have a naturalistic point of view, and they talk about various different ways that you can incorporate these spiritual practices in one's life. And I've found it incredibly enlightening in many ways, and I've adopted some of the practices myself.
All right. Absent other questions, thanks so much again for speaking with us tonight, for taking out the time.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you for having me, everyone.
Bye.
Okay. Everybody have a good rest of your night.
Bye.
Thanks, Daniel. It's fantastic.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. Take care, everyone.